Well, good morning. All right, y'all are alive. That's great to hear. How do you measure success for your life? How do you know you're winning? If you play baseball, you know what the measure of success is: runs scored. Football, it's touchdowns or points on the board. Did anybody happen to go to the Bananas game last night? Savannah Bananas. Was that crazy or what? It is not baseball, however. They change the rules. They count points by innings and not runs. If you're playing banana baseball and using regular baseball rules, you're going to lose, in other words. It would be a tragic thing, don't you think, to come to the end of life and realize you're using the wrong scoreboard, the wrong scorecard, and you think you're winning, only to look back and think, I lost. What a waste. How do you win? Well, Jesus said that winning is fruitfulness. Jesus said, I have chosen you that you might bear fruit that lasts. You're saying, so what's fruit? What does it mean to bear fruit that lasts? Well, that's what God's commands are about. One of the first things in leadership, if you're going to lead well, is you have to have clear expectations. God gives us clear expectations in his command. What does it mean for you to win? Obey my commands. It's not just like getting you to do something because he wants you to do it. It's like I'm clarifying expectations about what it looks to win. You know how many commands there are in the Old Testament? Somebody counted them, 613, they say. You say, but we're living New Testament times. You know how many commands there are in the New Testament? Somebody counted those. Over 1,000 commands, and 1,050 commands is what I understand in the New Testament. You say, but that's a whole lot. How do I win with all of that? Well, Jesus boiled it down for us when he was asked what's the greatest commandment. Love God, the Lord your God, with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. You say, okay, that's kind of vague. What's that look like specifically? It certainly is lived out in various ways specifically, but Jesus made it really clear in his last command what it looks like when he said, make disciples. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them, teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded you. How do you win? You are a disciple who makes disciples. Jesus repeated that same kind of charge to his followers as he was about to ascend into heaven in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, where he says, and you're going to be my witnesses where you are in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and to the uttermost parts of the world. I got to thinking about that recently. Do you realize how many of them went to the uttermost parts of the world? Most of them went back home to work the field, to work the farm, to fish the waters, to raise their families. Were they just being defiant of Jesus? Jesus said, go into all the world. And they just went back to live their own lives. I want you to understand today, God has called you to be fruitful in all the world. I doubt that any of them made it to Hawaii or Fiji. God has called us to make where we are by how we live. You might say it like this: their fruit grows on other people's trees. The fruitfulness that we are experiencing right now with New Life Christian Church can be traced back to their fruitfulness and faithfulness in the Jerusalem church, in the Antioch church, in that first church. And that their calling is our calling. The question I want you to first of all see, God is able to do immeasurably. God is doing more than we could ever ask or imagine. God is producing more fruitfulness than we can see at any given time. I want you to catch that vision. But I also want you to personalize that vision to understand God is calling you to be fruitful where you are so that you can produce much fruit, so your fruit will grow on other people's trees. You're saying, Brett, you speak in riddles. What are you talking about? To help us with this is going to be Todd Wilson, who's going to join us right now. Todd, some of you who've been around for a long time know Todd. He was our executive pastor, came on staff around the year 2000. Part of why y'all can identify, many of you can identify with Todd is because Todd was originally a government worker. Todd was a nuclear engineer with naval reactors, the nuclear navy. Did that for a while until God called him into ministry. And then after he was on staff with us for a while, God called him. I realized after a while, Todd's ministry is much bigger than anything New Life can do locally. It is a kingdom-wide ministry. And so God called him to be what I would call a multiplication missionary. And ever since then, Todd has really kind of headed up our church planting, where we start churches that make disciples who make disciples. I've asked Todd to help us with this today. And I'm going to begin with would you all welcome him, by the way? Yeah. Much more enthusiastic than I think he deserves, that it should have been. But anyway, but Todd, what does it mean for you when we talk about our fruit growing on other people's trees? I know this is very personal for you. How is that meaningful for you? What does that mean for you?
Sure. It's really good to be back seeing all of you. It's kind of been a reunion weekend for my wife and I, Anna. I was with Naval Reactors for about 15 or 16 years. They're celebrating their 75th anniversary this weekend, so we're back. And I'm picking up conversations with people I haven't seen in 25 years just with that. So it's good to be back at New Life periodically and seeing faces and getting to talk to people. So thank you for letting me be a missionary to multiplication. I want to kind of start, it hits me with, you might be saying, what in the world is a missionary to multiplication? And then I'm going to jump into the fruit part of it. I wouldn't get to be a missionary to multiplication if New Life wasn't seeing their fruit growing on other people's trees. If you back up, and I could go farther back in time, but the time period Brett's talking about back in 2004, 2005, I'm the executive pastor at New Life, and New Life needs an executive pastor. But Brett sees that there's a role that I need to play different than that role. And you're not going to find a lot of churches that will take their executive pastor and continue to fund that role as a missionary to something. And so there's a couple of things you can learn just from that step that Brett took. One is the posture of New Life. Just think about when financially you're taking one of your senior people and saying, let's shift them over to be a missionary. What has to happen as a backfill? Now you still have to hire an executive pastor. So financially, it is a very direct impact, thank you all, that I've been able to get to do what I do through New Life kind of thing.
But it was an obvious decision for many reasons. First of all, God builds the church, we don't. And it was really clear that the way God was using you was fruit on other people's trees. And we needed to release you to do that more rather than holding on to you to say, how are we going to... I remember after you'd been on staff for about a year saying, I do not want to do ministry without Todd Wilson being executive pastor. This is so much better, so much easier. I can't imagine with that. And then sure enough, I mean, that's just like asking God to take somebody off staff, and so.
But you know what, and not to beat it, but you've really got to get this point. So that's 2004-05. Back the clock up to 1994, when New Life is getting started. This posture of our fruit grows in other people's trees is embedded in our DNA. When Brett started New Life, he and Laura, 7 people in a living room, just like small businesses, not every church makes it. There was no guarantee that New Life was going to make it. And so if you look what happens in the first couple of years, it's just like a small business startup. You really don't know if you're going to make it till about year 3. So at year 3, Brett knew that he wanted New Life to be a church planting church, even though we don't know the details of that at the time. And so we get to year 3, and there's a deep breath. I think we're gonna make it. We're gonna survive and be a church. And one of the very first things that happens is Brett sends 2 of the 3 staff people to start our first church. And a chunk of the budget. I don't know what the chunk of the budget was, but some of the budget.
It was all of our, but Brett didn't send anybody. It was really, God used our leadership to say, yep, we need to, because I wouldn't have had the courage to do that. But the leadership agreed, yep, this is what we need to do.
Yep.
So but it's a very personal thing for you that our fruit grows on other people's trees, because it has to do with just how God made us to live.
Yep. So I think if we take that statement, our fruit grows on other people's trees, and Brett did the fruitfulness passage before I got up, I really think we have to press into the idea of fruitfulness. Each of us, I don't want you to hear what Brett and I are saying today and say, well, I'm in the marketplace, or I'm a stay-home mom, or I'm whatever. You're in full-time ministry. Oh, that doesn't apply to me. That is not the case. What we're going to talk about today, if I could go back 25 years, I'd still do the ministry path I did. But if for some reason I couldn't, I would be applying all of what I've learned right now to applying this kind of thing where I am in the marketplace. And so don't fall into the trap. Just like last week with us sending off several church planters, it might be easy for you to conclude, well, those are church planters. They're going off to do their thing. That's not me. I really want to talk to you today as this idea of fruitfulness. We're all everyday missionaries with a mission field where we work, live, and play. And this ripple effect of the idea of our fruit grows on other people's trees. When we say our, that doesn't mean the institution of New Life Christian Church. That means all of us living in a way that my fruit grows on other people's trees. So I think we have to start with the definition of fruitfulness. Like, what does fruitfulness really mean? Were you going to say something?
Yeah. So Todd, last week we had the residents, church planting residents. We've been able to help start a whole bunch of churches in our history. Those churches represent a whole bunch of people who are coming to Christ and have come to Christ as a result. And that is a lot because of what God is doing and has done through you, Todd. But you weren't always at that place where you would say, what makes my heart beat fast is my fruit growing on other people's trees. How did you get from where you, because this is what, I think most people are where you were. You know, especially if they're government workers and they have a plan for career and trajectory for the future and want to be retired or whatever. How did you get from that mindset to where you are right now?
Yeah. So let me start with where the mindset is today and then unpack the getting there. If we go back 2,000 years from Jesus and the disciples to now New Life Christian Church 2,000 years later, all of us in this room can track our spiritual lineage back to the 12 disciples and Jesus. If we could draw the family chart all the way around the wall, we would see how our lineage gets to where we are. So the idea that fruitfulness transcends that 2,000 years, I know in my head, and I knew in my head 25 years ago, I might not have articulated it this way, but I knew that disciples make disciples who plant churches that plant churches. And if we were to look at that trajectory of 2,000 years of Christianity, I'll call it kind of the backbone of it. The way it's perpetuated has been disciples who make disciples who plant churches that plant churches. I never saw my fruitfulness through that before coming into ministry. It wasn't, I didn't know how to grab onto it. Now I can look now and see that much of I'll now go to the good in the world, the good things that happen along the way, still off that backbone of disciples who make disciples that plant churches that plant churches. And now all of us in this room represent lots of important good things that are happening, but it's still the disciple-making, church-planting part that would be the fruitfulness piece of it. So what I want to highlight for us is all of us are tied together in our spiritual lineage by the disciples who make disciples that plant churches that plant churches. We need to find our fruitfulness in that, but we also each have an expression of fruitfulness where we work, live, and play, what we're doing in our lives, what we do in our communities. It needs to be part of how the fruit comes off of that main thing. So if I go back, let's go back 25 years into the past. I'm a Jesus follower. I am part of an organization, Naval Reactors. It was, I'm going to call it my dream job. It's the job I could have done for the rest of my life. Candidly, there's parts of it that I didn't want to leave it. At the reunion last night, Anna asked me, are you regrets from moving on? And it's like, I really miss what it would have been like, but I don't have regrets moving on to something new. But 25 years ago, I really was loving what I was doing. I promoted fairly quickly, and I started realizing at a young age, wow, I have more years left in this career than I've already done. Is this really what I want to do with the rest of my life? And the way I would articulate that, at the time I started wrestling with it, a guy named Bob Buford, he owned one of the largest cable companies in America, a Christian. Bob wrote a book called Halftime, and the subtag on the book was Moving from Success to Significance. The book came out the first year that I was sort of wrestling with, is this what I want to do with the rest of my life? So I picked up the book, and even though I didn't have all Bob's money, here was his thing. Two pieces were in that book. One was the idea he was going to have a lot of money from having one of the cable companies in America, and he decided, I want to spend the rest of my life giving my money away in a way that the last check would bounce. I don't want to just pass on a bunch of money. I want to live the rest of my life as if the last check's going to bounce. The second thing he talks about in the book, when he was wrestling with maybe where many of you are and where I was 25 years ago, he saw a strategic planner, and here's God's humor. The strategic planner that he went to see was not a Christian. And so he meets with this strategic planner, he and his wife, and they spend a bunch of time with him. He's trying to figure out, what am I going to do next? And the strategic planner sat him down and said, Bob, draw a box on the page. And he said, you've got to decide what's inside your box. And Bob's like, what do you mean? And he's like, I keep hearing you talk about this Jesus guy, and I keep hearing you talk about money. What are you going to put inside, a cross or a dollar sign? Which is it going to be? And so when we're talking about fruitfulness, we're not talking about, Bob wasn't talking about just go bury all of his money. He was talking about, what's fruitfulness going to look like on my target of my life? It's more, how am I going to use my time, talent, treasure, and for what purpose? So I think we've all got to wrestle with what that fruitfulness piece is.
And the word I've heard you use previously, though, is the question is not, are you going to be fruitful? The question is not, will your fruit grow on other people's tree? You will produce fruit on other people's tree. It's just how you're made. Take a step back. Every apple has within it the seeds for other trees, for other orchards. God has placed within you, within each of us by nature, the ability to reproduce and to multiply. The only question is, will your fruit be temporary fruit, or will it be eternal kingdom fruit? Jesus says, I have called you, I have chosen you that you might bear fruit that lasts. And the way you determine what kind of fruitfulness will I have begins with what's in the box. Is it a dollar sign? Is it pride? Is it your own ambition? Or is it the cross? That's the first question that has to be settled. You will bear fruit. What kind of fruit will it be? It's your eternal, that's your choice.
So Anna and I, my wife Anna and I, the wrestling match that started to go on was, although I didn't use the language, what's in the box, I started wrestling with, I call it the 2-column exercise. I'd take out a piece of paper, I'd draw a line down the middle. On the left side would be life as it is, the 401k, the job security, the future, the health care, all the things. And on the right side was, what would it look like to go into ministry? And the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over and hope you get a different response. I kept getting the same lopsided scorecard on that 2 columns. It was always more on the left. And in reality, when I look back on it now, it really, I don't think from God's perspective it's about the money or the 401k or the things. It was the decision of a step of faith toward a different scorecard, toward a different what does fruitfulness mean. And so if I would have done the exercise 25 years ago, how am I going to measure fruitfulness in my life? it would have had Christian things on it. It's not absent Christian things. It's just, if I'm really, really gut level honest, the cross isn't at the center of the box. I'm going to keep it in the box, but it's not at the center of the box. And so I think for me, the process of the calling was really God having to put to death the things on the left side to let a new definition of fruitfulness be in the center.
Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you as well. Now let's pause there for a second. God, our plural fruit is growing on other people's trees. We work together as the church, and God produces fruit through us together. Bob Buford's a really good example of that because financially he made decisions that his fruit would go and build. We can trace our lineage for New Life, and I didn't realize this, but to Bob Buford's investment of finances and things that influenced and helped us. So Todd comes on staff, and through Todd making that decision, we have had more influence than we could have asked or imagined. Share the story of working with the church. Donnie Williams was here last year, and we helped start his church about, 18, 19 years ago. But Todd was recently at their church, and it reminded us of how God produces fruit through us because of what you've invested, because of financial commitments, and we wouldn't even have seen it if Todd hadn't been at this meeting.
Yeah. I think Brett's talking about a ministry we started 20 plus years ago called Church Marketing Solutions. And I think the bridge I want to do from the past to that real quick is part of what I had to put to death when I was making the step of the scorecard was I had made the decision I was going to leave the government and go start a company. That's what I thought the next thing was to go start a company. And that's part of what had to get put to death too, was this being the entrepreneurial start a company. And in God's humor, if Brett and I spent a little bit more time walking through what happened when I got to go into ministry, in the first 6 years of ministry, we're starting or re-engineering multiple national startup things, including one which was a marketing company for churches. So we started them. Did you want to say something?
I want you to hear, I want to connect the dots to make sure you hear what Todd is saying. Right now, one of the things that keeps you from going full bore for God's kingdom is fear that you're going to have to die to the dreams that really matter to you. And so you want to play it down the middle. I want to do what I want. I want to also do what God wants. Todd had to say, okay, God, I really think that I want to start businesses, but I'm not sure how to do it. I do believe that you want me to do this kingdom thing. And now Todd realizes, oh wait, the vision was God's, the application had been yours.
Right.
But once you surrendered the application, okay, God, I'm going to do, you got to say, oh, this is how God wanted me to start businesses for fruit that lasts.
Right. So imagine we are starting this marketing company to help other churches with marketing as a nonprofit. And I'm going to say we really don't know what we are doing. I'm an entrepreneur, but I've never run a marketing company or done a marketing thing. We don't have staff people doing marketing thing. So people in the church who have marketing experience are helping us with getting this marketing company going. Now here's what you can't miss is even though we're not doing the marketing company anymore, millions, and I mean millions of direct mail postcards have been sent all over the United States to help invite people to church that don't know Jesus to come to church over the time we're doing it. And it may be over 100 million invitations to church. It's a lot of invitations. And so last year, Devoted City Church down in Raleigh, North Carolina, which we helped start out a new life, I was over just meeting with them, and I was in a circle of about 15 of their staff and leaders, and we were just doing introductions, and they went around the circle to introduce how they came to know Jesus and how they came to Devoted City Church. 3 of the 15 people in the circle, their story was they received a postcard when the church was starting, and they came to church, they came to know Jesus, they ended up as a team leader at the church, some of them ended up on staff at the church. That's 3 people at one church out of hundreds and hundreds of churches we've helped across the country. That's our fruit grows in other people's trees. We're going to collectively sit around in eternity someday. And I'm not kidding when I say this. New Life is one of the top 5 reproducing churches in America. Brett and I aren't going to go into all the things we're doing, but someday we're going to sit around in eternity and there will be millions of people there. Not thousands in our church right here, but millions of people will be in eternity because of things we've done, because of things we've touched. That's the multiplication effect of our fruit grows in other people's trees.
And you just can't see it. I didn't say this the first couple of services because there's a sense in which it doesn't matter. But the other thing that's fun about that, church marketing, the largest church marketing organization in the world, I think, is Outreach Marketing. Because we were able to do higher quality at a lower price, because Outreach Marketing, Todd's had a close relationship with the people that lead that in the last 15 years. They said, y'all scared us to death. They had to lower their prices for marketing 30%. So even the churches that were using their marketing, they were able to do more, or they were able to do it more affordably because of this. God does more than we can see, is the point in all of that.
Yeah, and again, we're not going into all the detail, but that church marketing ministry that most of you have never heard of, it's what led to Passion for Planting. So there's a continuity of story that goes between things.
Yeah.
So those 5 residents that we sent off to plant churches last week are a part of a bigger story that just keeps unfolding through different paths.
So Todd, now I want you to imagine you're sitting here 25 years ago. Part of the reason, again, I wanted you to share today was, first of all, for people to have a sense of what we're doing, which we haven't done very well with that, but for people to go through this process that you went through, because you didn't have the vision for God wants my fruit to grow on other people's trees 25 years ago. So if somebody is saying, okay, I want to do that, but how do I do that? Where do they start? What else? What matters?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things we have to do. I think I'm going to say it starts in the mind with a shift in thinking. It's got to start with seeing ourselves differently in the roles. And let's be clear, I'm going to make the assumption that we're not right now talking about, although some of you may need to step into full-time ministry, we're talking about right where we are right now. You're a stay-home mom, you're an engineer in the marketplace. It's what can we be doing to see a different fruitfulness?
It's Jesus' followers who went back to fishing and farming. They didn't go to Hawaii.
Right. So I think it starts with a change in thinking of how do we see ourselves. And the language I would put on that is I would strongly encourage that we start by seeing ourselves as what I would call an everyday missionary with an everyday mission field, or a mission field where we work, live, and play. So where we already are, what does it look like to see ourselves as a missionary? If you don't like the word missionary, pick a different word, a chaplain, just pick a different word for what you are. But the missionary word works, I think, pretty well. To be a missionary, you don't have to be the lead person of a church. A missionary is in a mission field and seeking to cooperate with God with what's happening in that mission field.
Missionary is just another word for one sent. Somebody who hears Jesus say, go.
Right.
Keep going.
Yeah. So I would say one thing that I was challenged on early in the journey was a guy named Alan Hirsch said to me, where are you spending the most people with time? And at the time I told him at the gym. And he said, well, why don't you just declare yourself the chaplain of the gym? And I'm like, well, can you do that? And he's like, you can declare yourself the chaplain of anything. Sports teams have them, whatever. So I want to encourage you, just from a thinking standpoint, if you were going to become a missionary or a chaplain, where would it be right now? Where is the mission field? Maybe you're part of a homeschool co-op. Maybe it's your work group at work. But
how did that affect your thinking then?
Yeah, and so here's how it affected the thinking. If I play out what does it look like to be a chaplain at the health club, all of a sudden, thinking is number one, because here's how it changes it. What did I do when I went to the gym? It was, when can I go with the least amount of people when the equipment is least used? And think about it, if you're gonna be a chaplain, you don't want to miss people, you want to be there interacting with people, kind of thing. And I said in the last service, the old-fashioned synagogue in old times, the sauna at a health club is kind of like the old-fashioned synagogue, where a lot of conversations happen between people. And so, but think about the conversations that happen now it might be in your setting, but think about in a sauna for a second. And I'm thinking, I mean, seriously, I'm not making this up. There was a young guy, who was training to be a world fighter or something, and he's 7 days a week fasting. And the reason he's in the sauna is his commitment to this thing. Now, look at the intersection of the conversation that can happen when you put different eyes on. If I see myself as the chaplain to somebody in that setting, it interacts the setting differently.
So see things differently. Talk about intentionality.
Yep. Intentionality, when Ann and I moved back to Durham from here after 30-some years, I have just had this sense of, I'm going to say, calling. And as you hear this story, this is not relative to vocational ministry. I'd be doing what I'm getting ready to describe if I were still an engineer in the marketplace. I had a real sense when we moved back to Durham that part of my calling was to Duke University, that there's something about Duke University that's the mission
They're very
field.
lost. If you go to, obviously we don't have many NC State fans.
Well,
here.
and as an NC State grad, it's kind of weird to move to Durham, North Carolina, and feel like Duke University is the mission field. So, partly COVID at the time, but I just started prayer walking Duke University every week. So I would go over almost every Sunday afternoon. And prayer walking means, here's how simple it is. I would walk around campus and I'd pray. And the prayer was really simple. It was the same prayer that I used to have for my boys almost every day of their life growing up. In that case, it was, God, put the right people in their path. My prayer walking around Duke was, God, just put the right people in my path. Run me into people as I'm walking around. And I'm telling you, it's not the point of today. I could write a book right now on how God has answered that prayer walking around Duke. It's turned into if you wanted to be a missionary at Duke and you're prayer walking for God to put the right people in your path, one of the things that's happened is an 85-year-old guy who's the head tour guide of the entire sports complex at Duke, including Cameron Indoor Stadium. He's one of the guys that's part of the answer to prayer. And through that relationship, he says to me, how would you like to be one of the VIP tour guides at Duke? Well, if you're a missionary at Duke, being a VIP tour guide at Duke, it doesn't get much better than that in terms of the relationships, the networking. So that's an example, Brett, of the intentionality of intentionally being engaged.
I want you to hear this intentionality. I want you to hear everything that you said, and just ask you, what is God's vision for your life, for your ministry, for your impact? I think part of the beginning of this place is saying, is not seeing ourselves as my fruit is in success, but my fruit is in kingdom fruitfulness, kingdom significance. We all have capacity. We all have potential. Some in this place are like Bob Buford. Some are, I think about the number of people that you work with, Todd, who they feel so responsible because they have so many hundreds of millions of dollars, for instance. And they're just like, okay, how do I do this? How do I use this for kingdom impact? Not just that, how do I use my giftedness for kingdom impact? And it's a burden. And some of you are feeling that, but you're thinking, well, I'm willing to hold babies and shake hands, but what use is what I have for the kingdom? And so that intentionality of just praying, God, show me what you want to do. Show me how to do. talk about scorecard then. If to make that transition, there's got to be a scorecard transition.
Yep. I think if I go back to the book Halftime that I told you about, one of the things Bob talks about is that really, if you boil down, what do we have to give? We have our time, we have our talent, we have our treasure, our finances, our time, our talent, our treasures. I think the issue of scorecard in all three of those areas, you might think finances, and it's one of the pieces, but the idea of first fruits, and that's where the scorecard links in. Where am I investing the first fruits, not just of money, but of my time and my talent? And now we linked, once I get the picture of what my scorecard is and what my fruitfulness is, that's what's going to drive how I invest my time, talent, and my treasure. So I've got to get that first. I've got to have a sense of what's the primary thing in the center of the box. Now, how do I line up my time, my talent, my treasure to that thing?
I want you to keep running with this, but that's how it goes to the box. But you get what's in the box. But here's the challenge that's going to be for most of us. You're going to want to do two boxes. I know people who love the Lord, who are like, I want my life to matter for the kingdom, and I've got to be financially secure. I want my life to matter for the kingdom, but I'm really committed to my retirement. I want my life to be secure, but I have this plan for advancement in my career. And I'm going to do both for the glory of God. And I'm going to say, you know what? If you're trying to do both, you've settled that God is not in the box, the first in the box. And that's the first thing you had to surrender, was that. And so as part of me would say is, great, but you got to say, are you really going to totally surrender the scorecard, not to success and ease and whatever, but to eternal significance, eternal fruitfulness? And you know the thing that's going to keep you from that surrender? It's fear. You're afraid of not having security in yourself. You're afraid of not having security in your future. And you got to surrender all those fears to God, saying, God, I can't control the future. You can control the future. All I can control is my obedience and trust if you will be obedient, he will make you fruitful and he'll take care of you along the way.
I think it's important, Brett, that this idea of it's a shift in priority and focus. It doesn't mean that we throw away the job or necessarily. I'm thinking in two cases, like Bob Buford, when he said Jesus is going to be at the center, the cross is at the center, he continued to run the company for 10 or 12 more years and doubled or tripled the value of the company while shifting his focus. So it wasn't, oh, I've got to get rid of the company so I can work on Christian stuff over here. What he did was here was the big change for Bob. He would have said to you, if we were talking scorecard, my scorecard, I had one. It was to grow the company to this amount, see a 20% year over year for 10 years, be the number one. He had the goals of all the things. What shifted was what the goal was. The goal shifted from accumulation to deployment. It shifted from how much can I accumulate to how much can I give away. But that didn't mean that he stopped doing the company. It meant I've got to start focusing on what I'm giving away. The first step he made, at first he was thinking maybe it's an endowment somewhere. Maybe I can just write the check. And the more he thought about it, the conclusion was, you know what? I want to give the money away, but I want to be involved with my time and talent. I don't want to just write the check. I want to be involved in the things I'm doing. And so he tried putting the time, talent, treasure. I've got another guy I'm working with right now who he's started 3 very successsiul companies. I mean, we're talking really successful
I'm glad
companies.
You're telling this story because I've not been able to tell it.
And here's where he's at this point. He's young. He's got more years left working than where he's at. He's already sold one of the companies, and he's set for life. He's got 2 more companies. And guess what he's going to do with the second one? 100% of it's going into kingdom stuff. It's the idea, and let me say it this way. When is enough enough? I want you to let it sink in. When is enough enough? Is it 1 million? Is it 10 million? Is it 50 million? Is it 100 million? When's enough enough? And a lot of the guys and gals I work with, they're way past the point of enough's enough. And if we're really honest in Northern Virginia, even though we don't think it's the case, we're very wealthy compared to the world. We're already past the more than enough's enough point. The issue is our scorecard of how do we see what we've got differently to deploy our time, talent, treasure to a different end than just more accumulation.
So what's in the box? How am I intentional every day? God, show me. God, put the relationships. God, lead me. Changing the scorecard, being really conscious about what is your scorecard. Be honest about that. Overcoming the fear. So people are about to leave. What would you say next step? This is what you need to do.
Yeah. I really, if I were in your shoes, I wouldn't let the week pass without really spending some time thinking about what does fruitfulness mean on my scorecard. Like actually writing down what path and trajectory am I on right now? If life stays on the path it's on, and we're at my, people are doing my eulogy now, what's the comment of fruitfulness at the end? And I think just doing a true accounting of what my definition of fruitfulness is right now. And a second thing would be this idea of declaring myself a missionary, a chaplain. If I'm gonna be a missionary with a mission field, what is my mission field? What is it? And what does it mean to be a missionary? What might it look like in that way? And starting to think differently about that. And I think there needs to be it's got to go beyond the thought to, let me do something about it. Let me take a step into it.
So what is your mission field? My home church, I showed that picture a couple of weeks ago about how they've had worldwide impact for years. And you know what? A lot of them, their mission field was their family. They wanted to raise kids who love the Lord, who wanted to serve the kingdom. Their mission field was wherever they were. And anyway, so what's your mission field? Anything else you were wanting to say?
I want to just challenge with this. I didn't say this either service, but one of the things I had to wrestle with, Bob Buford really put me onto this. I was mentored by him for about 15 years later on after the book part. And Bob really challenged my thinking on retirement. Like, what's the idea of retirement? And he got in my face quite a bit about, he basically said to me, show me in the Bible where you see retirement. Like, give me the biblical basis. And so I had to wrestle with this idea, wait a minute, am I just gonna try to be fruitful to a certain point of retirement, and then what? There's a different thing after that? Or is the definition of fruitfulness go all the way to the end of my life? And as soon as I see that definition of fruitfulness extending beyond some man-made thing called retirement, the question is, are we going to get stuck in the someday when syndrome? Someday when I've accumulated and gotten my retirement thing together, that's when I'm going to be able to engage my time, talent, treasure the right way. And I just want to challenge you to blow up the someday when paradigm. What if there's a definition of fruitfulness that goes the whole length of life? And retirement is just a shifting of where your desk is. But you really need to implement that fruitfulness that you think comes someday after retirement. What if you had to implement it now? It's not after retirement, it's starting to implement it now.
That's good. So what's in the box? Intentionality. Jesus said, I have chosen you. Normally when we hear Jesus say that, we think, for salvation, I got to go to heaven. I've chosen you that you might bear much fruit that lasts. So what's it look like for you to live for fruit that lasts more than you can see? How can you be intentional about that every day? How's your scorecard aligned with that? What do you need to do now? I hadn't planned to do this, but some of you in your next step may be trying to figure out God's calling for you. Todd wrote a book. called More that we have. I think we have some copies back there still. We'll just go ahead and if you're willing to read, if you commit to read it, go just take a copy. And you can also find stuff online for the. Do you have a slide for More? Hello. Okay. Then what else? Oh, next week. What's it look like to be a disciple who makes disciples? Bobby Harrington started an organization called discipleship.org. I think the largest church, discipleship organization, largest discipleship conference, I think, in the United States. And so Bobby's going to come and talk about, Bobby's good friends of us. We work with Bobby in a number of different things. He's going to come and talk next week about discipleship. What's it mean to be a disciple who makes disciple, to kind of continue in this theme for us. Let's say a prayer. Heavenly Father, I pray that you would take the seeds of what have been planted today and produce fruit that lasts in each of our lives. Lord, we're made by you, we're made for you. We want to surrender our lives to you right now. We want to pray for Todd and for Anna, for the ministry to which you've called them, for Todd's physical health and strength, for the spiritual attacks that he faces. God, we thank you for your blessings and your calling, and we depend on you and your goodness to do your work. Help us, Lord, to run strong through the finish line. Through Christ we pray. Amen.